Now, we are shifting gears after all the nuts and bolts breakouts to present you all with a special cross-generational dialogue and emergent wisdom sharing between an elder and a youth. With the rising tide of young people fighting for their future globally, we must uplift the importance of their role in all of our collective futures. I am now pleased to introduce Facilitator of Change, Akaya Winwood, and UN Young Leader for the Sustainable Development Goals, Luisa Franco Machado, a digital rights activist, technical advisor in data governance and AI policy for international organizations, and an advocate for youth participation in policy making. The pair together will explore radical generosity across generations and sharing and shifting power to create a future in which everyone can feel empowered to lead and make strides in an increasingly complex world. Please, my friends, round of applause for Akaya and Luisa as they make their way to the stage.
Yeah.
Maybe we can put our feet on the floor and just take a breath. Seriously. A lot going on in the world, here. And just take a moment and notice how you are. So my name is Akaya Winwood, and what we're going to do here is what I call an emergent conversation, where we haven't rehearsed this. We don't have bullet points, which terrified her, and I appreciate the bravery it took to say, okay, I'm willing to do that, because that's not easy. So I'll ask a question, we'll have some conversation, she'll ask a question, and you might notice that there's a pause between the question and the answer. I invite you, the audience, to notice how you would answer the question if you were asked it. That this is not about preparedness, this is about letting our wisdom emerge. So, we're talking about power.
Yeah.
What is it, Luisa? What's power?
I think power is having this possibility to make a change or to choose not to. Power is really an opportunity to craft the world in a certain place, to craft the world in a way that is going to have such impact or the lack of that impact. So for me, the power is possibility. And that's why we see so many powerless people out there, because they don't have the possibility, the voice to be heard. And that's why I'm so happy to be part of this conversation on shifting power, on radical generosity. This is something that we usually don't hear in these spaces, right? We don't talk about shifting power, even if all of the changes that we want to see in the world might involve shifting power somehow. So for me, power is having a voice, is having a possibility. What do you think of power? You have done so much in all over the world and impacted the lives of so many people. I wanted to ask not just about what's power, but how has your relationship to power shifted throughout this time?
Well, I used to think about power as something you have over people. And in many ways, hierarchical power is about that. Where are the power lines, right? As I've grown and learned, I'm finding that power is about relationship with. It's our capacity to meet each other where we are. And that my power increases as I engage more from a community level, right? You and I didn't know each other 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And met in person for the first time today. And as we sat there at lunch, I found myself completely falling in love with you. And that's, to me, what power is. Right? Where we can create the conditions by which we can fall in love with each other. And I think that's just inherently human. It's not like something we have to learn to do, but my power increases exponentially as I create more and more genuine, authentic, vulnerable relationships with folks. So when I think about power, it has to do with, I know I shouldn't say this because we are at the Javits Center, and this is a very important place at a very important conference, but what if we loved each other? What if?
I think we live in a society that is just dominated by hate. We see so much going on around the world, so many wars, so many conflicts. There's just so much going on that is just about hate. And I think that is so important to learn how to shift this perspective of hate to generate more love, more care. I really like the word that you chose, radical generosity. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. How does radical generosity manifest in the workplace, in society, in your organizations? What does that mean?
Well, I'm still practicing it, right? Because the world is not built for that, or the world in which I grew up was not arranged for us to be radically generous with each other. In fact, quite the opposite. The world in which I grew up, and I think in many ways is still here, is a world of hoarding, where one of the ways that I can say I'm powerful is based on how much I've been able to hoard. And I'm talking about money and time and resources. That has to shift. So what if, I haven't been to New York City since before the pandemic, right? Here I am at Penn Station, I'm schlepping my bags up the street. I actually walked to Times Square with my bags, and I had no idea where I was. And it's loud here these days, and bright, and I found myself a little lost. And I found, whenever I asked, somebody said, oh, here, let me show you where to go. And I found myself going, how did this happen, that New York City became so generous? And I think it's I've been practicing generosity, which means I've had to really rethink my relationship to resource. That I'm not well if we aren't well. Mm-hmm. It's in my best interest for everyone to thrive. And so it doesn't feel radical to me. In fact, I think it's liberating when we get very generous. So that's kind of where I am with that, but that's not how I was raised.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I want to have these conversations cross generations is because we come from very different contexts, right? Yeah. You and I come from very different contexts geographically and in a number of ways, but generational differences, I think, are in some ways the most important difference right now in the world, that we bridge these divides, right? So this is one of the questions I often answer. What's the difference between an old person and an elder?
You tell me.
I asked you.
You have the lived experience that I don't.
Well, I think the reason I ask is because I'm finding that one has to earn elderhood.
Huh.
It's not just something I can say, oh, by the way, I decided I'm an elder yesterday. That's not how it works. It requires a community to say, oh, this is an elder. And some of us who are old aren't elders. Because I believe that with eldership comes a responsibility to be in relationship with the next generations and to support them. So, what would you ask of us, those of us who are older, elders?
I think I would ask the same difference that you made just there between an older person and an elder. I think that happens a lot with youth as well, with young people, that we're often boxed. That's the youth, and you are very often not much more than that. So even though I am a digital rights expert, I'm a specialist in digital transformation, I'm often invited to talks because I'm young, not because I'm an expert. So how does that put me in this box of young people, and also the expectation that we have of young people, like, oh, you are the future, you are the one that's going to create change, you are the one that's going to transform society. But often that comes at the expense of, well, the older generation will hold on to that power. Your time to change will come. That might be in the future. You are the future. I think we really need to shift this narrative around young people towards two things. First, recognizing us for who we are beyond our age. And second, to really understand that we're not the future, that we are already making changes now to society. We are at the forefront of the climate movement. We are at the forefront of digital rights. We are at the forefront of social change. And that doesn't mean that the older generations are, disposable. I think that I feel this fear a lot coming from older folks, that they are really afraid that young people get into positions of power, positions of leadership, because we might throw them away, and that's really scary. So I wanted to ask you that, as someone who has this, position towards radical generosity, towards shifting power, intergenerational shifts, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with this fear of being thrown away? And what have you learned from your experiences that you can maybe share with others who might be feeling that fear as well?
I was raised, so I'm 68 and a half, and I was raised at a time, I'm a boomer, and where what we did is who we are. We were trained to think about our worth in terms of what our work was, right? And so now, as we're the next generation to at some point shed our mortal coil, a lot of us are not sure what it means to who we are in a current context, right? And this is a moment, I think, where we're going to, as older people, need to shift our role in the world. So instead of always being in front of the room, we need to be in more support of the ones who are coming after us. Hence these kinds of conversations, right? Mm-hmm. Because I was invited to come and do a TED Talk, and I said, no, I'd rather be in conversation because I want to support your leadership, right? And I think it's a gift when we as elders can step not aside, but beside you, so that we're here, you can count on us, and we're not going to take up all the space in the ways that so many of us were taught to. And that's a huge shift. And it means that I had to rethink what power was in the world, right? Because I used to be always the one in front of the room. And it was, who's the smartest one in the room? And that's tiresome. So to be able to stand with you and not in front of you is a crucial, I think, necessary step if we're going to continue to evolve as a human species. Is there something specific you would ask of my generation?
I think I would ask you not to be afraid of me. Because I often feel like there is this paradox when it comes to power and leadership. There's a paradox that is older generations are either afraid of us or completely dismissive of us. And it's very hard to find a balance between, why are you afraid of me? What do I do that causes this feeling on you? Because in the end, that's what it means. It's not about me, it's about you. I am here trying to do what I can to make the world a better place, just like you. So I ask you to, reconsider your own thoughts about me. And these thoughts have been shaped by your own fears, your own perceptions of yourself, of the world. And at the same time, I also ask you not to dismiss me because of what I look like, because of how many years I have, behind me, but especially in front of me. I think that there's so much that young people can bring to the conversation. And I see a shift. I see the creation of youth advisory boards, of youth chairs, of youth groups. And I think that's a great start. But it shouldn't stop there. The idea is not to create a segregation between young people and older people. It's not to create a kids' table in a space where older generations are leading. I think it's time for all of us to be at the same table and think, okay, how can we see each other as equal? How can we see each other as all capable of working towards a goal, be it social change, digital transformation, climate change, or whatever topic that is? I think that I would really ask you to reconsider your own biases, perhaps.
Are you saying I have biases?
We all do.
I'm teasing.
We all do.
Yeah.
And it's important to do this sort of own responsibility check. I know I have biases, and I work really hard to shatter those preconceptions of society that I certainly have because of where I grew up, because of how I was raised. And I often see young people doing this sort of reality check. And that's why we're so worried about all those social changes, all of these transformations in society. But are you doing this check as well? Thinking, who's not in this room?
Yeah.
Who's not in this room that is not part of these conversations? Especially if you're creating products or projects or policies that are going to have a bigger influence in society, right? So I want to ask you that. What do you want to ask younger generations? How do you make this shift, a reality? How do you make it tangible?
I don't want you to write us off as obsolete because we use different languages. I think that we don't want to be irrelevant, right? Or left off out of the circle. We were laughing backstage because, she has her iPhone, I don't know where that's it, right? That's where she keeps her notes. And I show up with this. And in some ways, that's indicative of our different contexts, right? I do have an iPhone, so I'm not that far out of the 21st century. But our contexts are very different, right? And the way I grew up, it was a lot of binaries, right? Things were either or. People were either or. Men, women, black, white, whatever it was. And so I had to work really hard to shift my mind frame from that conditioning. And that was uncomfortable, right?
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was, because then I had to be wrong about some things that I thought were true. And that's tricky.
It hurts.
Well, humbling, right? It was humbling to go, oh, what I was taught is true is no longer true. And so I had to learn to create space for information that was uncomfortable. So I'm hearing us say a very similar thing. Don't count us out. Don't ignore us, because we need all of us. And I'm thinking about workplaces. You know, I'm asking all of us now, the audience too, to think about how do these things show up at work, in your organizations, where who's talking to who? Where does the power lie? Who makes the decisions? Are there young folks in those decision-making spaces? Are there older folks? Who's making them? And I'm not saying that, what am I saying? I'm saying it's important for all of us to engage this. Because in a lot of DEI conversations, we're looking at who's not at the table in terms of race or class or gender or whatever. I think we also need to now include age. Because the decisions that you can help me make are going to make me smarter, and vice versa. And thereby our decisions will be more reliable, right? But it does mean that we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations and be very brave about it. Because our contexts are so different. And yet, because we speak the same language, we think we're having the same conversation, and often we're not. I'm going to ask you a personal question, if you don't mind. What are you dreaming of, Luisa? What are you dreaming of next? And what support might you ask of us, or me specifically?
You know, we're living in a world that is being completely reshaped by digital technologies. But those technologies, they're not acting in a vacuum. They're being crafted, designed by a certain group of people, usually in the global north, usually by teams that look nothing like myself. Yet, I am being the most impacted by these choices. My generation is the one that is suffering the most of decisions being made by platforms, by digital initiatives, by policies. Yet, we don't see a diversity in the people that are making these changes, the people that are, making those decisions. So I think it's time to walk the talk. It's been 10 years that I've been doing activism for social inclusion. 10 years. And then I think now it's time to walk the talk and create an initiative, create a world where we can have the most diverse group leading those changes. That means creating technologies, crafting policies, designing solutions. So I think now it's time to create a global coalition where we can have folks that know about US policy and practice, folks in Europe, but especially folks in Latin America, like myself. I come from Brazil. Folks in Africa and Asia, what we call the global majority. So it's time to reshape how technologies are created and especially how they're governed, to make sure that we're not crafting a digital world that looks too much like the worst of our physical world. Or a digital world that is fostering hate, that is fostering misinformation, that is fostering exclusion. And I think it's something really interesting you talked about the binaries. It's really time for us to shuffle this binary perspective of gender, of race, of ability. I know that many older folks have no idea what a non-binary person is. And that's okay. But you have to keep asking questions. You have to do your work to make sure you're not excluding even further those who are already forgotten by society, by policy, by practice. And how you can help me, Akaya, is to hold space, to connect me to those who might be able to help me with that. Be it by mentorship, by funding, by activity, but especially, I don't want you to go away. I need you to stay there with me. Not because I couldn't do it alone, but because I don't want to. I don't want to do it alone. We want, as young people, intergenerational knowledge. We want to learn with everyone. We want everyone to be included. So it's not about excluding you, or no. It's about reimagining power, reimagining decision-making to make sure that we're leaving no one behind and that we're walking the talk.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, how do you think that this can happen? Do you think that I'm dreaming? Do you think that I am completely off track and yeah, you can do that, but maybe in 10 years? Is that possible?
Oh, I hope you're dreaming. And I hope you're dreaming off track. Because we need that off track, new, fresh dreaming, right? The challenge will be, how do I come along with you, right? Because, you know, when you were saying AI and you're an expert in that, and I realized, is that AI? What is that? And I'm not that naive. However, a lot of us are, because it wasn't anything that we thought about. So how can you help us bring us along so that we can help you do what you're going to do, right? Because you're going to live, 25? You've got maybe 80 years ahead of you. I have maybe 25 years ahead of me. And you're going to live into a future that I can't imagine, and nor should I. But I want to be able to support that future happening, even if I can't be in it. Or maybe especially because I can't be in it, because then I can trust you and you to bring it about. Essentially, the most important thing here is that we need each other. And it's tricky because it's so easy, especially in this bifurcated world of right and wrong, to leave each other behind. Let's not do that anymore. We have a minute. Last thoughts.
I think if you can leave here with just one thought, is that young people are not the leaders of tomorrow. We're the leaders of today. And the best way to do it is to support us in this quest. What do you want folks to take out of this conversation, Akaya?
Say again?
What do you want folks to take out of this conversation?
Reach toward one another. Take the risk of falling in love. particularly across generations. Let's listen to each other. We're smarter together. It's so much more fun. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Akaya. Thank you, Louisa. That conversation is definitely a strong reminder that we all must listen and challenge each other to open our minds and our hearts in service of collective change. That definitely hit me right in the heart for sure. So thank you both.